Signals of Safety by Dr. Teresa Dam, clinical psychologist at Warwick Hospital. It's probably reasonable to say that we've all been living under various degrees of threat since the start of the pandemic, but that the things that feel threatening now are probably also quite different to what felt scary or uncomfortable at the start. At the beginning, we were suddenly bombarded with lots of frightening information and uncertainties about the virus. We found that shops were suddenly harder to get into, with long queues outside, and when we did get in, the shelves were often empty. We went into lockdown. Schools closed. We had to work from home. Lots of families had to manage an unprecedented situation of homeschooling while trying to work from home. We couldn't see loved ones for a very long time, and we also had to get used to wearing masks and seeing people in masks, which has probably been quite uncomfortable on many levels for many people. So besides the actual threat of the virus, what was hard was the impact that it had on aspects of daily life that we used to be able to take for granted, that suddenly weren't possible or now involved lots of risk calculations. Now things are quite different, and while some of the initial difficulties might be less of an issue, there are new challenges arising, and many of us simply feel more stressed or more anxious than usual without really understanding why. And that's what I'd like to explore in this video. Now, the traditional view of stress is that when we perceive a threat, we have some sort of reaction to it, like fight or flight. And then when the threat is gone, things can go back to normal and the threat reaction diminishes. So for example, if a zebra sees a lion, it might respond by fleeing. And then when the lion goes away, it's as if the zebra's threat response also goes away and life seems to return to normal for the zebra. So it's almost like the zebra's threat response can be switched on when it perceives the threat, so for example the lion, and then if the threat goes away, the threat response itself also switches off. So why does it so often feel like stress persists even when there are no obvious stressors? Well, one explanation is that our amazing human brains have the power of imagination, and we're able to worry about things even when they're not there. And that worrying and imagining reactivates our threat system. And the idea here is that the threat response is switched on by our thoughts and our worries in a way that might not happen for other animals. So if we were in the position of that zebra, we might be thinking, what if the lion comes back for me? What if it eats my friend next time? And these sorts of thoughts keep our threat reaction going. Researchers at the University of Leiden, led by Professor Joost Broschot, suggest a different model. Their idea is that the absence of threat is not enough to switch off our threat response. Rather, what we need is to perceive an actual signal that we're safe in order for our threat response to diminish. So it's only when we perceive some signal of safety, not just the absence of threat, that we can relax and our threat response subsides and we feel safe and calm again. So the idea here is that the stress response is actually our default response, not a reaction that gets switched on. So it's a bit like a car rolling downhill, and the forward motion is our stress response. You don't need to press on the accelerator to move forward, but rather you need to apply the brake to stop, and the brake is the signal of safety. So we're born with a stress system that by default is always switched on, and that doesn't switch off just through the absence of threat. And as we grow and develop, we learn to recognize the signals of safety that help us switch off our threat system. And this is actually really great from a survival perspective because it fits with the principle of better safe than sorry. But it can leave us with a tricky dilemma of what actually constitutes a signal of safety in our hectic modern world. So let's have a think about how you can build more signals of safety for yourself in your life. The first step is to acknowledge that living through a pandemic is really hard, and it is not a failure or a sign of weakness to feel stressed and worn out by it all. So much of our individual stress sensitivity is determined by genetics and very early life experiences, and these are of course completely out of our control, so it is not your fault if you're feeling tired and anxious. Next, you can take some steps to try to calm and soothe your body. This might include slowing your breath down to a soothing rhythm, becoming aware of and releasing any tension you might be carrying in your jaw or your shoulders, doing some yoga, going for a walk, whatever works for you. This might be quite different to what works for somebody else. Try to find ways of staying meaningfully connected with others. As a social species, humans are wired for group living, and being cut off from others is the loss of a huge signal of safety for us. But what does being connected really mean to you? If seeing someone face to face feels unsafe, could you have a video call instead? Or if this feels overwhelming, could you record a voice message or send a text? Or does it mean sending a card or a letter or something else to show that you're keeping another person in mind? Remember, these strategies are not all or nothing. So if one form of reaching out feels overwhelming right now, perhaps there's another way of meeting your need for connection that's more manageable. Lots of goals and ways of feeling safe are harder to attain now, with increasing or changing regulations. And this can leave us at a real loss for how to experience the safeness and control that we crave. Worrying about achieving goals that are outside of our control can actually really fuel our stress response. So redirecting your energy towards what is in your control can help provide those important feelings of safety and achievement, even if these things are actually quite different to before. So this might involve problem solving what is in your control and letting go of goals that are now outside of your control. And finally, beware of worrying. Now that might sound strange, but sometimes worrying can feel like it provides some sort of solution or gives a sense of relief in the short term. But unless you are genuinely problem solving and coming up with solutions, this style of thinking inadvertently really ends up keeping the stress response active. So it's one to keep an eye out for. Now that can be difficult when we're being constantly bombarded with information and news and social media. So one step to take may be to place boundaries on how much you do interact with the news and social media. So notice if this is where your mind is taking you, and then you may find it helpful to go through these steps to develop a signal of safety to calm your mind. Now, these are just a few suggestions, so I invite you to play around with what helps you feel that you're perceiving a signal of safety. And my takeaway here really is that our stress response does not go away just because there is no threat to perceive, but rather we need to actively perceive safety. And that safety may feel different from one person to another. Thank you so much.